Hello, and welcome to In the Roud. Greetings and salutations, dear listeners. My name is Matt Quinn, and this is In the Roud, a folk song podcast. Join me as we travel through the world of traditional folk song, one song per episode, in the order they appear in the Roud Index. Each episode will feature two guests, one providing an historical look at the song, while the other will be a singer from the folk music scene to talk about their own version of the song. We're now in the middle of Season 3, and this is Episode 4. This week, we're looking at the song labelled Roud 24, which is Child Ballad number 8, the ballad called Erlinton. Just like 2 weeks ago, when we looked at Gil Brenton, we found this song, with a couple of exceptions on the current folk scene, hasn't been found in oral tradition anywhere. So, another pretty unknown song this week, but then again, by the very nature of the format of going through the Roud Index numerically, it gives us the chance to delve into some songs that aren't just the obvious, well-known ones. So join us for a look at Erlinton, a break from the usual episode format this week too, just one guest, because she's done all the research, not that there's much research, and also is one of the only people to have ever done a setting of the song. And because there's no oral tradition evidence, we have no clips to play in the middle of the episode. So it's just going to be one chat this week. She was last on 2 weeks ago discussing the history of Gil Brenton, and is now back to discuss all things Erlinton. I hope you enjoy my chat with Helen Lindley. Also, just a slight apology for the strange audio quality on my voice in the chat with Helen. The Zoom chat interview went well, as it always does, but then when I came to listen to the audio feedback in my in the editing process, something had happened to the feed that my voice was on, and it sounded absolutely horrendous, and I have no idea how it happened or what could have happened, but I managed to fiddle around with EQ and some digital trickery, and I managed to get my voice sounding like you can actually hear what I'm talking about. Anyway, so here's my chat with Helen Lindley. Well, hello again, Helen Lindley.
Hello, Matt.
Hi, how are you again?
I'm very well.
Yeah, we had you on 2 weeks ago for Gil Brenton, and you're back now for another sort of pretty unknown, not as unknown as Gil Brenton, but a pretty unknown child ballad. We'll come to all that in a minute. Basically, yeah, this is another child ballad that hasn't been found in the old oral tradition, really. Although there's the occasional mention of it in a book and things, but so there are no field recordings of this song, so it hasn't got much of a history, but we'll come to what there is. And it's, I can only find one, maybe two instances of it on the folk revival. And I did reach out to those singers originally to see if they wanted to come on here, but for various reasons, work-life balance, that they're busy and whatever, they weren't available. So I then was struggling a bit to really sort of think, well, what can we do with this episode if there is no singer guests available? And then I practically jumped for joy when I realised that you had done a setting of this one, because I remember thinking, well, I know Helen's done settings of things because of her work for Sing Yonder, which we'll come to, and through my work with Sing Yonder as well, is that I know that we've both done sort of settings of some of those child ballads that haven't been sung much. I wonder if Erlinton's in there, and Bowenly Hold, there it was. So I practically levitated out of my seat with joy. I thought, I found my final singer guest for this episode. And then what happened was I was struggling to find someone who could come on and talk about the history of the song, and then I realised that was probably going to be you as well. and you were very much up for that. And so we're going to have a slightly different episode this time, in that you are the only guest, and we're just going to do one long chat. Not long. We'll see how it goes. One chat lasting lasting a length of time.
What happens
Basically,
when you put two chatterboxes in one podcast?
well, we'll see. So yeah, we're going to have because through basically you had done a bit of research into this, but then did some more for the podcast, and you have done a setting of the song. Therefore, you're the singing guest as well. So, but because there's no field recordings, old oral tradition recordings, there's no point in splitting these chats up. So we might as well just do it in one go, I guess. So here we are, and so normally I have a set of questions I ask the historical guest and a set of questions I ask the singer guest. But because you are both in one, we are going to jumble them up a bit.
Ooh,
And
exciting.
we'll come to the song in a little while. And we'll start with a question that's normally asked about an hour into the episodes. And we'll go with, as in the singer half, tell us a bit about yourself and your sort of upbringing, if there's a musical upbringing there, and your relationship and your history with folk music. How did you come to folk music? All that sort of thing.
Right. Well, I came from a musical family, but like so many, not a folk music family. My family, I'm from Stamford in Lincolnshire originally. And Stamford has and certainly had when I was growing up a very big music and theatre situation, loads of productions going on every year. So I spent a good part of my childhood in theatres with varying members of the family performing. My granddad was a guitar, banjo, ukulele player, and he did a lot of orchestra stuff for the productions. My mum was a singer and carried on singing throughout her life. She doesn't do as much now, but she certainly was up until about 15 years ago. And so I grew up in a house where singing was normal. The problem I had is I was incredibly shy as a child. People find that a bit hard to believe now because I'm a lot less that way inclined. But that's because I learnt to, come out of my shell somewhat in as I grew older. And there's nothing like hitting your 40s and then your 50s to think, I'll sod it. So hence here I am now. Yeah, so I grew up with music. I watched programs from the 70s. They did these music nights on the telly. And I'm listening to these things on from the 70s and the 80s. And there was just suddenly songs will come into my head that I remember being practiced, being rehearsed around the house, ready for varying performances. So it is very much part of what I grew up with. But that was mainly either popular music or show music, musical theatre numbers.
Right, sure.
So that's what I basically grew up hearing and certainly hearing sung. I would have said, we listened to a bit of Irish music in my 20s. That's me and the guy who was my boyfriend is now my husband, Simon. And we used to listen to a bit of that. But folk didn't feature at all. And also I thought, I remember, liking a bit of, folk stuff. And we all like the Pogues and Levelers and stuff like that. I came from sort of a goth and rock and alternative thing in my teens. And prior to that, a bit of electronic. So I was very much into music, but not folk. And then I sort of life got in the way, stuff happened, and I owned no instruments for quite a long time, having sold keyboards, guitars, bass guitar, all that sort of thing, because I just didn't have time, so I just stopped. And that was okay. And then we used to watch religiously Jules Holland at the weekends when he
Aha.
was on.
I
Um,
think I know
uh,
where this might be going.
yes, you probably, I think you've heard this story before.
I probably would have watched it at the same time as you.
Yes. What happened was December 2006. There's this. in the middle section of Jules Holland always used to have an artist. It was either world music or something more niche. So you used to get things like Seasick Steve or something like that would be on the middle section.
And I remember one of those years, it was the Ukulele Orchestra of Great Britain, and that's what catapulted them to stardom.
Yes, and I used to love that slot because it was just something different. On this particular December day, or evening, there was this band came on, and it was like something I'd not heard anything like this before. It was, of course, Bellowhead, and it changed music for me. And that sounds really, really glib to say, but there was because I'd come from a rock background, and certainly on the alternative side, and because there was a little bit of punk and that sort of thing within it. That there was something in that music that just grabbed me. So much so that the next day I went out and bought Burlesque because they sang Jordan, which was from the
That
album.
was the very first time Bellowhead, because Bellowhead did Jules Holland three times.
Yeah,
And I remember that first time they did Rigs of the Time in Jordan, the opening two tracks from the album
yeah.
Burlesque back in those
I heard,
days.
and that was it. It was just, I mean, I was,
Yeah.
I can't put into word. I can still remember the episode. There were very few artists that I can remember actually seeing what they were doing, but that was one of those times.
And my nerdy brain can tell you exactly what the other songs they ever performed in Jules Holland were, because they came back when they did Hedonism, the album, and they performed New York Girls and Cold Blows the Wind, and then they did the Hootenanny one year and they did New York Girls.
Yeah,
So there you
I
go.
didn't see all of those because by then I'd started having children, so time sort of got a bit
Yeah.
muddled.
So
So,
that's my brain. I just retain those sorts of things. But
yeah, no, I saw that.
that was a very key moment for a lot of people seeing Bellowhead and Jules
It
Holland.
was.
Because
But what?
because me being in a folky background, so I grew up with folk music. So I'm pretty sure that I saw Bellowhead's third ever gig, which was Sidmouth Folk Festival of 2004. And so by the time they come to Jules Holland, I was like, well, I know this band already. It's all from my perspective, it was awesome to see a folk band on Jules Holland. Whereas
Yes,
from your
that's it.
perspective, it was, oh my God, what is this? This is
Well,
amazing.
it was what was really interesting was it what at the time I thought, oh, this is brilliant. What else are they doing? That was my first thought. And very, very quickly, that was, well, what else is like this? So I discovered very quickly Faustus.
Yeah.
I discovered Eliza, obviously. I discovered Morkin. I adored Morkin. So
Yeah.
so there was that sort of thing. It was that quite loud, quite full-on sound that attracted me to the folk scene.
Sure.
And I thought for years that was where my liking for folk started. But as I got more into the trad scene, as you invariably do once you start getting into folk, I discovered that it wasn't that at all, that it had always been there. Because I was a child of the 70s. And unless you're in the 70s, you don't realise how mainstream folk music was.
Certainly with Steel I Span around and things, it was,
Yeah,
yeah,
I mean, I realised I used to go around, singing Maddie Pryor when I was little. So it really is it was very much in my childhood without me realising, because nobody had turned around and said, this is folk music.
sure, yeah,
Because
of
it was the
course.
popular music of the time. Whether you were listening to Steeleye, whether you were listening to the Spinners, whether you were listening to uh, children's programs. If you watched Play Away and Play School and all those sorts of things, you had Tony Arthur on there.
Indeed, yes, of
And they were
course.
singing folk songs, but you didn't realise they were folk songs. If you unless you're in the folk world. Um, there, mainstream television had the comedians who were also folk performers. You had Jasper Carrott, you had Mike Harding, you had Billy Connolly, all these things. So that idea of folk, it wasn't as separated as it is now. It was very much part of
Sure.
my mainstream childhood. Um, and the more I got into folk, the more I could then backtrack and think, I remember this song. And that became very apparent when I discovered things like the Tim Hart and Maddie Pryor. CD and all those sorts of things. So my folk journey had started way before I realised my folk journey had actually begun.
Very good, very
Um,
good.
and that was, but I think it just took that. I have an immense love of bands who do something very different with folk, because that acts as the draw to get people in.
Sure.
It does get knocked that, oh, well, somebody's done something and I don't like it because I'm from the trad background. But how else do new people find it? Because someone who, like me, was full black goth as a teenager, not necessarily have found traditional folk music if that's all that was available. And I needed the guitars, the drums, the things that I could identify with, in order to bring me in,
Sure.
which obviously it did. And then it got a bit of a passion. As it does, because I'm really into history as well, that idea that everything comes in, you've got historical elements. And when you get into social history, folk music there's so much
Yeah.
in social history with folk music. And that really interested me. So,
So how did then that your journey then take you towards Carl Sinfield and the Sing Yonder project?
well, I was a listener of music for years. And it wasn't until I had always harbored a desire to play fiddle ever since I can remember. But it was like it was too hard, and I didn't grow up in that sort of area. Music lessons were an expensive thing that people like me didn't do. So that was
Right,
that.
okay.
And so basically, the thing that grabbed was having children, because you lose inhibitions more when you have kids, because you have to do stuff that's out of your comfort zone. And I'd spent years not thinking that I couldn't sing, because I couldn't sing choral stuff, which is what like school choirs and that want. Um, and you know what it's like, when you think you can't do something, your brain complies. And there's also a certain element with singing in particular that if you don't put the power behind it and it goes a bit shaky, it doesn't sound in tune. And so you convince yourself further. And then other people say, oh, no, she can't sing, or whatever.
Right.
So confidence is a big part of singing, isn't it? Is being able to actually just do it.
Indeed, yes.
The minute the confidence isn't there, it is quite hard to carry it off. Now, I think I know I've said this in a different interview. I've said it a few times. There was a comment, and I think it was Bryony Griffiths, but it was somebody like that who turned around and said, in one particular thing I'd read, if you can sing Happy Birthday, you can sing.
Yeah, that's fair.
And that is, fairly true. And come on, that's the ultimate in folk almost, isn't it? It's Happy Birthday. Everybody knows Happy Birthday.
Yeah.
It's an oral tradition song if ever there was one. So yes, I could sing Happy Birthday. I could sing nursery rhymes to my kids. Most nursery rhymes are from the folk tradition as well.
So about eight, I've found at least 80 or 90 nursery rhymes that have round numbers.
Yes, and
You
that's
know,
the thing. It is very much. I mean, it is what they were collected, and we shouldn't knock them for the fact that we use them as children's songs,
yeah,
because that's the essence of folk music is it's a family thing. Or certainly the oral tradition thing is you start learning songs young.
yeah.
So I would sing quite happily, even in public, if we were in like a restaurant or something, and I was singing to my kids, it wouldn't bother me. And that was a bit of an eye opener, or an ear opener even, to say, well, I don't mind singing these and I can sing them.
Yeah.
When my kids then got older, they were about 5 and they wanted to take up instruments at school. So my son took up clarinet, and he was 6 at the time. Now his sister is 2 years younger, and everything he did, she wanted to do. I mean, you've met my daughter, Charlotte, because she comes with me to many, many, many folk gigs. And she wanted to do everything her brother did. So she also took up clarinet. And then she started saying, having been brought up on a diet of folk music, both my children, she wanted to start playing fiddle. She'd seen, I don't know if when the final Bellowhead tour went out, in
May of 2016.
2016.
Yeah.
Yeah, that one. And there was the DVD with it.
Oh,
Um,
the live, the final,
yeah, that's the
it's called
one.
live, the farewell tour, isn't it? It's on my
That's
shelf.
it. Now, the children could sing Bellowhead songs and Nancy Kerr songs when they were little.
Yeah.
I have recordings of Charlotte singing. She can do a very good Nancy Kerr, I hasten to add. She was singing this stuff. She knew the words to things like Lily Bolero and Prickle Eye Bush, Gosport Nancy, all that. She was singing them when she was 4 or 5 years old. And she saw this video and she saw John playing fiddle. And she decided she wanted to play fiddle.
Right.
It's like, oh, right, okay. And there's a little seed in my head. I've always wanted to do that. So bought her a fiddle and we found a local fiddle tutor. And Kate, our fiddle teacher, was brilliant because I phoned her up and said, my daughter's sick. She wants to learn fiddle. She said, that's fine. I said, I don't know where to begin because I've always wanted to do it, never have. So she said, oh, you come along with her, and for an extra pound, you've got to be there anyway. I'll teach you as well. So that's how it started. That I went from nothing to all of a sudden, like, oh God, all this stuff's happening. It's all this music.
Right.
I'm being asked to do stuff. So that's how I got into actually performing. Was through what the children were doing.
Yeah.
Um, now, I certainly wasn't doing much singing at that point, and I was only playing fiddle for my own pleasure, and nothing more than that. And that carried on like that until 2020 came along, and then lockdown hit, and all these musicians all of a sudden were floundering with things. Well, what can we do to earn money? And quite a few set up Patreon accounts. And I started getting involved in some of the Patreons. And two in particular were very influential because I joined Sam Sweeney's Fiddle Workshop Patreon, and I joined John Bowden's General Patreon that he ran at the time, which has now just finished. And they were great because you were sort of dealing in small groups with these varying musicians. Rach McShane went online doing fiddle workshops as well, which I did some of those, and they were great. So all of a sudden, all these musicians were having an influence on me directly, not just as part of their bands or their on-stage personas, shall we say. You're actually dealing with them on a one-to-one basis.
Yeah.
At the same time, Eliza Carthy set up the Clubhouse Folk Club, which I mean, I know you came on a few times.
Oh, I've forgotten about that. Yeah.
Yeah, that was absolutely influential to me because we had the Clubhouse Folk Club on a Wednesday night, and on a Thursday night, Piers Corley did the Ballad Room.
Yes.
And those sort of those apps, the Zoom Patreons and the Clubhouse stuff, enabled me to do stuff in the comfort of my own home, musically, but publicly. And so that's how sort of the performance stuff came into being. I would be, we were all floundering. Everybody was in the same boat. Everything was new. So even someone like me, who wasn't known in the folk world in any way, could join in. And that's how I met these people. It's certainly the first time I think we ever sort of met, for want of a better word.
Yeah, I reckon so. Yeah.
I met. That's how I met Piers Corley, for example, who was incredibly encouraging. Obviously, dealing Eliza, she would actually say, "Well, if you can't find a tune for a song, write one." It was that sort of thing. That it was really interesting to be a part of because it was like for an outsider from the folk world, being able to see what happened inside. The things
Yeah.
that folky people like yourselves have taken for granted was all new to me because you sort of know it by default because you've been brought up with it. I had to learn it from scratch. But lockdown gave me that opportunity. So if we're ever, I tend to look for positives, and that to me, from those quite awful dark times sometimes, was actually a positive that did come out of it. So gradually, we were all meeting up on social media as well. It wasn't quite. It went through a period of not being toxic, the social media channels, because everybody was trying to get along and sort of and work things out together. We used to be on Twitter when it was nice, and
Indeed,
we
indeed.
did, and we were all sort of sharing stuff and having chats, and it was lovely, and it sort of brought me into this very lovely family of people, and that it gave me that insight, and that's, I say, how I met you, and it's how I met Carl. um, Carl had discovered a song, or a few songs that I'd started writing tunes for, and then said, "Will you do some for me?" Which is how I ended up doing the tunes for Sing Yonder. And occasionally, there'd be bits where he'd put posts out. I'm trying to find out about this, and it'd be something I'd know about, that I'd read about, and was able to say, "Yeah, here we are.
And there
Here's
you
my
are,
information."
and there you are in the Sing Yonder fold.
Yes, and I think it's because sometimes, because I probably was an outsider, it meant that it was a different perspective that I could bring.
Yeah,
It's very easy. I know this from my upbringing, when musical theatre was what I knew, and it's something my family still do. My daughter is rehearsing for two different shows at the minute, and one of them is quite a large show. And so I always knew about that side of performance, but not about folk. And so that's why I find the whole scene really interesting from that
yeah.
point.
And so, this week's song, did you come across that initially as part of your Sing Yonder work, or was this
Yes.
tangential from that?
No, it was very definitely that I had. It was only because I started doing stuff with the Sing Yonder publication, that that it would come out, and you think, oh, this is great, because it's the way Cole puts it across, isn't it? It's short, sweet, relatively amusing, and it's a really condensed version. Well, in this case, there isn't much else to say a lot of the time, but it's yeah, that's where I discovered it. But I wasn't going to do anything with it, because there were already, as far as I could see from looking at the thing, it was like, oh, well, there's some further listening, so somebody's already done it.
Yeah,
And I was just developing an interest at that point in resetting songs. And that was fueled by Piers and Eliza, because I was coming into a tradition where there are a lot of songs that are sung a lot of the time, and there are even more songs that are never sung. And part of my thing was, I didn't feel I could bring something new to many of the songs that everyone else was already singing. And it's, well, how do I find my niche, if you like?
yeah,
And the one thing I realized is, having written a lot of poetry when I was younger, and I was always, since I can ever remember, I've always composed little tunes in my head, or I've always written alternative lyrics to songs. We'd do it to make the kids laugh and things like that. It was always something I did without even thinking about it. And it was only in one particular of the clubhouse sessions, and I said, "Oh yeah, I've got, I found these lyrics and I really like them, but I can't find a tune." And Eliza turned round and she said, "Write one." That as long as the original record exists, so that other people can see the original, it
yeah.
doesn't matter what you do to it. There's her dad's favourite quote about, the worst thing you can do to a folk song is not sing it. And then it was Piers who said, "You would not believe how many songs there are, even in Child, that are no longer sung."
Indeed so, indeed so.
And you sort of think, well, yeah, child ballads, everybody knows child ballads. Yeah, but a lot of them aren't sung anymore,
And
because
for and with good reason sometimes, as
yes, we got reasons.
we came
But
across with Gil Brenton 2 weeks ago.
yes,
There's a good reason why
exactly.
people didn't sing them.
But in this instance, so I'd started doing these tunes. I discovered it quite literally through reading, but not immediately. It came about a little while after that, then it was like, oh, how had I missed that song? Because I didn't even notice it. I think I obviously hadn't read the publication properly, or something had cropped up, and it wasn't till last summer that I discovered it. And at
Okay.
that point, it became interesting to me.
Very good. So then, let's get into sort of the older sort of history stuff. Starting off as usual with what's the song about? What's the plot? We're talking. This is Child Ballad number 8, and
Yes.
there are only 3 versions in Child, and one of them's probably a forgery. And there's when it came to Bronson, right, who compiled the tunes for the Child Ballads, he just missed it out completely. It's not there in Bronson.
No.
So very interesting stuff. So start us off. What's the song about? What is the plot of the song?
Oh, this lord locks up his daughter because he doesn't want her to sin. Is basically the premise, and
Okay.
he built a nice room for her, which is nice of him, isn't it?
Hmm, hmm.
And he gets her 7 brothers and 6 sisters. The numbers may change according to version. To guard her in this room. Her true love Willie comes to the window. I can only assume that the dad did know about Willie, which is why I locked her up in the first place.
Right. Yeah.
So
Maybe.
he came to the window saying, "Why don't you come out?" And she said, "I can't because I'm locked in, and I'm being watched by my siblings, day and night." Somehow she persuades her sisters to go out with her one day to meet Willie, and they meet in the woods. Willie says bye to the sisters, and the lady whose name we don't know, and Willie disappear off on a horse. They don't get very far. There's some knights come along and try to take the lady back home, and Willie fights them all off, kills all but one, and then and then the two of them go and live happily ever after. That's in sort of that's the core essence of the song.
Right. Because this song does have similarities to last week's episode with Earl Brand and the Douglas tragedy. And
Yeah,
there's always a debate about because as we found out last week from Steve Garden doing the history of that one, Round 23, is that kind of really, I mean, they've got similarities, but Earl Brand and the Douglas tragedy are considered these days to be different songs, yet they've got the same child number. Child put them together as child 7. So consequently, because it's got the same child number, Steve Roud had to give it the same number, which makes it number 23. And then a lot of people believe that Erlinton should also be classified as child 7 because it's kind of the same sort of thing, but because it's child 8, Steve Roud had to give it number 24. And
yeah.
so it is, it's got a lot of similarities, I think, with
I think it's the happy ending that made it be put separately.
right,
Um, you know,
okay, sure, yeah.
it's. I mean, it does fit with how folk songs should be. A lot of people die, which tend to happen in traditional songs. But yeah, there is a happy ending. And but as far as we can see, to say yeah, there are links, but there's not. There just don't seem to be lots of different versions out there. As you say, there's 3 mentioned by Child. Um, what is it says? One of them it reckons is from 1650, but that's the one they think might be a forgery.
And that's the one that
And
mentions Robin Hood,
and
isn't
that's the
it?
one that mentions Robin Hood, which, as we know, Robin Hood was big money in the Victorian era. So if you
Indeed.
want your ballad to be sung, if you mention Robin Hood, you were probably possibly going to get a little bit more. You were going to sell more of your ballads than you were if it didn't. So it's very much a thing that I think that's the sort of the belief is that the Robin Hood one is not contemporary to the time. Uh,
Indeed.
but it's quite weird how it hasn't taken off. It
I
was,
mean, we did look this up. There's only 17 entries in the Roud Index for this one, and
yeah,
as
and
we
several
know,
of them are Sing Yonder anyway.
Quite possibly, yeah. And I know
Yeah,
that some of them are child because
yeah,
it's in Child Volume One, but then later on, I think there are reprints of Child. I think it also turns up in Child Volume Four in the additions and corrections page. So
yes,
so it's that's also Child. So there's at least sort of 4 or 5 of those 17 are Child,
yes.
which doesn't help much. And then
Yes, I
yeah,
think three are Sing Yonder, and then there's a minstrelsy in Scotland. Um, that
yes,
it's
we
in.
did find that a third edition of the Minstrelsy of the Scottish Border, 1806, which actually, looking at Child, that's actually version A in Child,
Yeah,
is the Scots Minstrelsy, 1803, made up from 2 copies obtained from recitation. However that helps, I don't know. But and then version B in Child is from a manuscript from Newcastle in the James Telfer collection, and then the third one is this Robin Hood 1650, probably total rubbish and made up.
yeah,
But yeah, so it's not found much, is it? And it's basically Scotland. Although there are 2 entries in the Radonix of America. We've got an entry for, waiting for it to load, a song called "The Soldier's Wooing." With the first line, "I'll tell you of a soldier that lately came from sea," round 24. It's in a 1940 book called Ballads and Songs of Indiana, collected in 1935 in Evansville in the US. And then it also turns up in a 1977 edition of a book called Ballads in North America, but it's only referenced. It says in the Radonix the contents discussion references only. So the song's not in there, but there's a mention of the song in there. Consequently, it gets a Roud index entry.
yes.
you know, and then consequently the Robin Hood variant gets an entry in a book of Robin Hood songs, I think, and so that gets mentioned there. So it's not there really isn't much in the way of sources. It's those 3 Child sources, and then either the places Child got it from, or other sources that then found it in Child. You
Yeah, I
know,
think the latter is probably quite likely for some of this, really, isn't
Yeah,
it?
it, it's
It was
it's
in
really
Child
that
first.
it's really that Scottish minstrelsy of the Scottish Border that is the one that Child got it from, I guess, because that's why it's in Child.
But
But
yes, there's not much about it. It wasn't widespread, and I think possibly because it is so much like so many other songs.
yeah,
Um, but with saying that, um, it's not it's not as I mean, I quite like the song. I quite like the ones with this. Well, it's got a bit of a rebellious woman in, and I did an EP of songs with slightly rebellious women in, all that were reset because I have a sneaking suspicion that the ones with the rebellious women didn't get sung as often as the ones with you know, the meek damsel, shall we say? Because a lot of the songs I've reset because there are no tunes have these strong women.
yeah,
And I think, and that, it's only just, that's just an opinion of mine, but it just seemed to be a bit odd that that should be the case, that the ones that didn't get sung in the oral tradition have these slightly argumentative or, women who were doing their own thing or getting their own way.
sure.
So I really like I think that's why I like it because she isn't standing for that nonsense and manages to escape.
Right, yeah, of course. And then I think tracing it back through history in terms of how far back can we go, it's probably is if you ignore the Robin Hood variant, which claims to be 1650 but probably isn't, then it's that Scots minstrelsy, 1806, I think it is
Yeah.
like. So I think, well, and that's, as we say, that might not be as far back as it goes, but that is as far back as the evidence suggests.
That's it. Yeah.
So I mean, that's fairly good. There aren't that many songs, at least that we've covered so far on the podcast, that go back any earlier than the early 1700s. because we
No.
had things like the Ragtag Gypsy, for example. I think we did talk about this on episode 1 of season 1. I think the earliest proper settings we've got of it are from the 1720s, but then there is a link back to a melody in a manuscript from like the 1630s. But it may be a link, it may not be, but it's interesting to look at it.
Yeah, I
But
think we've got
and the Seeds of Love can go back to the 1600s in
yeah.
one form or another. But really, it's the 1700s onwards these songs stem from. But 1803, 1806, whatever I just said, was that's not bad at all.
No, I think that's it. And I think also in a lot of when we're doing historical research, very often the reason that some of the songs don't get sung is because of that tendency to share tunes. And I suspect, again, not based on any evidence at all, but a lot of the songs that appear to have no tune, no melody, is simply because of that sharing of melodies.
Right.
Because it became that, oh, everyone was singing that version. Now that one may have had the same tune, but it's that version that stuck. Because I think there's a lot of we have a lot of evidence, don't we, for the sharing of tunes. And it's either that this was it was a horrible tune, maybe there is that, or as you say, it was being sung alongside the other versions that have been categorized separately.
Right, yeah. And there's some chat in Child's notes on page 106 of Child Volume 1 about it being a translation of possibly something Swedish
Yeah, that
as
appears a
well.
lot in ones we know nothing about. They always seem to suggest, oh, there was something Scandinavian about it.
Scandinavian, that's what I meant. Yeah, about the Scandinavian ribald ballads.
Yeah, that's the
Um,
ones.
uh, yeah, so you get this sort of stuff, and it does say at the end of the notes about this in Child, translated by Rosa Warren's Scottish Volkslieder folk song, number 24, and by someone else. But yeah, so it's whether that has any sort of credence in truth or not. Child might have known, or he might not have known. It's some things we'll never know, I guess.
I think also there is a very great tendency, certainly in England, when we don't know something, we say, "Oh yeah, well, it was probably Viking, it's probably Danish,"
Yeah.
because of how our islands are made up.
Well, we know from last week on the Douglas tragedy, Earl Brand, that Douglas tragedy has some links back to some Scandinavian stuff
Yes,
and things. It actually does have some links back to Scandinavian stuff. So, and since the Erlinton is quite similar to that song as
probably
well, then
likely.
then one can speculate as to the links there as well. But
Yes, and also I suppose when we look at, say, our history of this country, it is very much linked with the Scandinavian influence. Depending on where in the country you live, of course, but certainly if you're down the east side of the country and northeast, there are so many links that it is not unlikely that hints of sagas have made it into our folk music.
indeed so, indeed so. Yes, there's not really much we can talk about in terms of the history of that because that's all there is.
Yeah, that's it.
So then, going back onto your version and your setting of it, talk us through that because these are one of those ones that have actually it's not the longest song. The Erlinton variants, the longest Erlinton out of those three in Child. What do we got? Version A has 18 verses. Version B has 16, and then that Robin Hood variant has 31 verses. And I know you have done some work on some much lengthier ballads than this one,
Yes.
but
There was
I'm assuming that you did do a bit of chopping.
oh yes. Yeah, there's always a bit of chopping to be had in a
Yeah,
folk
yeah,
song. Simply because how we listen and sing traditional song has changed a bit because of all the other options for hearing music and being entertained that are in our lives. So if you're going to sing like in a session or in a pub, on the whole, the shorter the better. Sort of pop song length is ideal. Partly because there's often other people that want to turn at singing. And secondly, yeah, we do, it's this thing of, well, people zone out or they'll start chatting. And if you're in a situation where it is a specific ballad singing session where the longer ballads are encouraged, that's great.
Yeah.
But on the whole, if we're going to be singing in a pub, people want the shorter version. They don't want the repetition. Back in the day when the singer had all evening because nobody was going home to watch the telly or anything like that, they haven't got radios. It was perfectly okay to sit and listen to this storyteller come singer do a longer version. And the repetition actually became part of the songs. It's a bit like after the adverts, here's what you've missed. There is that very much that element of these days. It's not that our attention span has changed. It's just there are so many other things that are vying for our attention. And because when we're singing, like in a pub or that sort of situation, it is invariably at a folk song event and other people want to go.
Indeed.
So we need to be aware that it isn't just about us wanting to sing our song. I mean, I've got an 8-minute ballad on the Lord of Lorne and the False Steward, which is 8.5 minutes. Well, I sung that once in a session, which is when I just written it, and I sung that at Royal Trads. But it's not something I would sing in that sort of situation particularly often, because you're very aware that you're taking up 2 slots by singing an 8-minute song. And time is of the essence when other people are wanting a go.
So what kind of editing work happened on this one?
Not a lot. I mean, strangely enough, with saying all that, there wasn't a lot. It is obviously I've brought the language into more modern usage. Because some of it that is very much dialect written in a lot of these songs, so we need it in the English that we can understand today. If we want people to sing it. And it's easier to remember because otherwise you don't, if you've got to sing it in dialect and you're not from that dialect, it can sound a bit false. So I like to reword them so that it sounds as if I'm singing it.
Yeah, that's my approach as well.
You need to put yourself into the song a bit, don't you? I cannot carry off lots of accents convincingly. So I need it to sound, if I'm going to sing it, and I'm going to do a version and I'm going to do a setting, it has to sound like it's me. Because I can't put me into it if it doesn't sound like me. So that means the language has to be a bit more mine. And certainly a bit more modern. The one thing that amused me in this particular one was in the 4th line, he built a bigly bower. Now, I could not put the word bigly in a folk song because...
Not in today's current climate, no.
No, not in today's current climate. And that's the thing, that may have been in the original child lyrics, but times change, and if they have a different connotation and or have been used in a way that might not necessarily add value to the song, shall we say, without being too harsh, that I needed to change that. And Bonnie Bower is what we would use a lot more these days in folk song. It's a more acceptable phrase. So I put that in. I did, but yeah, a lot of it is very basically the same song. But I didn't go into quite so much of him knocking at the door and having a conversation or him knocking at the window and having a conversation. I kept that short and sweet, really. What she was wearing in bed didn't seem to be relevant to me, to be honest.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
I wasn't that bothered by her, her silken gowns and whatever. So I took that out. And there's they hadn't yet walked to the Greenwood, and then they had walked to the Greenwood. So let's just stick with them. They're going. We don't need to know that they were going to go.
Sure, yeah.
And then the
Sometimes
next
you,
verses they are going, So
sometimes you can just cut to the chase a bit. Yeah,
yeah, that's it, and that was exactly it. Yeah, most of that then, once we'd took out just those, and it wasn't that many lines to be honest. I think my version's what, one, two, three, four, five. I've got 11 verses.
okay,
So
yeah,
I cut six because my version is based on version A.
yeah,
I cut six, seven verses. I think that one's got 18, hasn't it? Um, and so and a lot of that was just language and that little bit of repetition. I didn't really miss out whole verses unless that verse was more or less repeating what had been said.
right, sure,
So I ended up with basically a poem, if you like, because we hadn't got a tune. But when I am writing and composing tunes, I am very, very much rhythm led. I can't write a tune if I haven't got a rhythm in my head.
sure, yeah,
So I need, even if I don't know the lyrics that are going to go, I need to have the rhythm that the lyrics are going to fit with. But the issue with some of the folk songs is that they've all got a similar rhythm, so you don't want to end up sounding like you're using your same tunes, or you're trying to do something different with the song. And I had fully intended to use the version that Carl had written when I first discovered the song. However, I was sitting on a campsite last summer. We do a lot of camping, and I was sitting, and it was in my head. And this is what happens with me with songs. They sort of start writing themselves when I'm doing something else. And that's what happened here. I got this bit of a tune in my head, and it's like, well, I'm on a campsite. I've got no instruments with me, but luckily, we've got phones and we've got voice recorders. So I just hummed the bare bones of a melody to go with this song, and that was great. Took it home, and then that's when I started working on it. So by that point, I'd got the reset lyrics, I'd got the bare bones of the tune, and then it's just a case of putting them together and tweaking. And you start, you know how it is, you come up with the melody, but then you need to live with it in order to see where it needs tweaking. And sometimes you just find yourself singing it or humming it, and your brain starts coming up with other ideas of where that bit could be tweaked. So
right,
very rarely does the melody you write become the melody that's used. So even in the version that I first recorded for YouTube, it has changed because I've sung it a lot more since.
yeah, sure,
And you find that there's certain phrases that need a bit of emphasis, or there's a certain note that you've put in that doesn't quite flow. And I certainly discovered that with the starting note, for example. I'd started and I found that I'd been singing it without that starting note. So I figured that's where the song needed to sit.
right,
And so that's what basically happened is there was the song, there was a tune that's just gradually evolved. And that's how I've sung it ever since.
there we go. And you are now a source. People can listen to your version and learn it, and
Yeah.
earn you a fortune in PRS.
Yeah.
I know you can't actually because it's still traditional.
It's
You
still
wouldn't
traditional.
you can't copyright that on PRS because because it wouldn't work.
No.
But yeah, no, it wouldn't work anyway. Um, yes, well there we go. And then yeah, we'll hear your version in a few minutes. You provided us with a recording of it for this episode, as we always have in these episodes. In,
Yes.
in terms of other versions, as we said, there are no field recordings. There's no oral tradition. We can't even find any evidence of oral tradition of this song, let alone actual recordings, field recordings. There are, however, two that I know of recordings or performances of settings of this song in the sort of folk revival, as it were, sort of modern folk recordings. One of whom links to 2 weeks ago when we had Nancy Kerr on and yourself for Gil Brenton, because the reason Nancy was first exposed to Gil Brenton was because of the radio show, the Sheffield radio show. Thank goodness it's folk, weekly radio show hosted by James Fagan and Sam Hindley. fantastic weekly radio show.
And it is available online for anybody not in Sheffield.
That's right, on sheffieldlive.com, I think it is, or .org, or the Sheffield Live website.
And on Mixcloud as well, if for listeners across the world.
And the back catalogue is also on Mixcloud. And yeah, on the May Day episode in 2021, they did Gil Brenton. As Nancy said, they're doing a massive project to go through all the child ballads in numerical order. And so, yeah, May Day of 2021, they came to Gil Brenton. And 3 weeks later, they came to Erlinton. And so James and Sam enlisted a friend of many people, a young guy called Sam Baxter from Glossop, but lives in Newcastle. In fact, I saw his dad last week, John Baxter, who is a very, very well-respected historian as well, and will come on the podcast at some point, will John Baxter, because his focus is on music hall songs. And at some point on the podcast, we will eventually get to some songs that have links to music hall repertoire and stuff. So John Baxter will certainly turn up at the podcast at some point. And yes, so James and Sam Hindley asked Sam Baxter to sing a setting of Erlinton for that. And if you scroll back through the Thank Goodness It's Folk back catalogue of episodes on Mixcloud, I'll put a link to that in the show notes. You can find an episode from 2021, May of 2021, where you can hear Sam Baxter singing it. And then something even more recent than that, Jack Rutter, very, very good singer and guitarist and bouzouki player, who I've known for a long time. He wasn't on the same degree as me at Newcastle University, but he did do a degree at Newcastle University at roughly the same time as me, although I knew him a long time before that as well. But he's been making solo albums over the last few years, and they're really good. And his most recent solo album, called This Is Something Constant, came out October of 2023. And on there is track 2, Earl Scarslington's 7 Daughters, Rouse 24, Child 8. And so it turns up there. And there's even a video of him performing it as well. So if you want to check out his album, This Is Something Constant, I'm sure he's got a website and a shop. And there's also a YouTube video of him performing it at Beardy Folk Festival from June of 2024. And so, basically Sam Baxter and Jack Rutter. And now Helen Lindley. There you go. You're in good company. You're in good company. But those are the only 2. So I'll put links to those in the show notes. And that's all we can do.
Yeah,
really.
It's as I say, it is. I like the song. I like the song, and I find myself humming it around the house and things. That's my criteria quite often for the songs I choose to reset. Is if I like them, then I'll do them, and if I don't, I won't.
Indeed. Well, very good. I think we'll finish there then. Thanks ever so much for your time on this. Much appreciated. I'm sure we'll see you at some point in the future. I think we did have a gander through what's coming up, because I have mapped out in terms of the songs what will come up over the next 3.5, almost 4 years on the podcast, just so that I've got an idea of what someone's coming up, who might be used and when. And we went through and looked at songs that, some of those unheard of child ballads that you have done settings of. And I think we know for a fact that we'll next see you in the summer of 2026 on the podcast.
Yes.
There may be an opportunity sooner than that, but nevertheless, we definitely know that Roud 65 and 66, which are Childs 101 and 109, will definitely
Those ones were specially commissioned by Sing Yonder, actually, for me to do.
Well, there we go. We'll definitely have you for those when we get to them in the summer. That'll be season 7, the summer of 2026. But
they are also on Thank Goodness It's Folk as well, because I was the only person available for those.
Oh, I see. Right. Yeah, of course. Fantastic. It all links together.
It does. It's a small world, the folk world, isn't it?
It is. But there may be space, there may be an opportunity for you sooner than that, but we'll see how we go. But in the meantime, though, Helen Lindley, thank you very much.
And thank you, Matt.
Lord Erlinton had a daughter fair, he tried to keep her from grave sin. And so he built a bonny bower, and there he kept the lady in. Brothers 7 and sisters 6 kept guard and watched her morn till night. But Willie, her love, to the window came, saying, "Won't you rise in the moonlight? My family watches me night and day, but meet me in the woods at dawn." She laid in bed till the cock crowed thrice, and woke her sisters in the morn. The maidens to the greenwood went, they saw Willie waiting alone. He took each sister by her hand, and sister 6 he sent back home. He's took his true love on his steed, and through the greenwood they have gone. But barely a mile had there to Roud, when 15 knights stopped them going on. An aged knight with beard so grey said, "Thy lady bride you'll yield to me. No people will think that I was mad, or else all courage had flown from me." Then spoke up a second knight, and he uttered boisterously, "Yield me thy life for thy lady bride, so surely you will die," said he. "My lady is the world to me, and my life I will yield to none. But if of honour you all be, you'll only fight me one by one." He's leapt off his milk-white steed, and said to his lady, "Please, my dear, until you see my body bleed, keep yourself all in good cheer." He set his back against an oak, and at his feet he set a stone. And he has fought all 15 knights, and slain them all but one alone. He has spared the aged knight, so tidings home he would carry. He's kissed his lady tenderly, saying, "Now we will roam in the greenwood free. Now we will roam in the greenwood free."
That was Helen Lindley singing Erlinton. And that brings us to the end of the episode. What did you think? What are your thoughts on the song? I'd love to hear from you. If you'd like to get in touch with me, feel free to drop me an email at intheroud@singyonder.co.uk, or visit the podcast on the various social media platforms. We're on Facebook, we're still on X just about, and then we're on Instagram, Threads and Blue Sky as well. Just go on them and search for In the Roud, a folk song podcast. If you're enjoying the podcast, I would very much appreciate it if you would give us a little rating and review on wherever you get your podcasts from. On places like Apple Podcasts, there's a star rating out of 5 and a little bit to write a review. It only takes 30 seconds to do that, and I really would appreciate it. On YouTube and all that sort of thing, it's there's like thumbs up buttons, and if you can subscribe to the podcast that way as well, very much appreciated. All that sort of thing goes towards helping the podcast reach a much wider audience, so Very much appreciated. Over on our Patreon, recently we've had the final episode from Mossy Christian's Singer's Choice mini-season. We've had Vic Gammon coming on and talking about the history of Old MacDonald Had a Farm. And we also had a Region Spotlight episode where Paul Wilson and Marilyn Tucker came on and discussed the topic of folk song collecting in Devon. If you feel so moved that you feel you are able to support the podcast financially, or at least help to, then please do head on over to patreon.com/intheroud, and you can sign up for either £5 or £10 per month, and you can receive regular bonus episodes. Starting this week, we have a brand new 3-episode Singer's Choice mini-season with special guest Rachel McShane. Rachel is a singer, cellist and fiddle player known for her work with the folk big band Bellowhead and also for her solo work with her band The Cartographers. Rachel has chosen 3 excellent songs and I can't wait to get stuck into discussing them with her and 3 guests on the historical side too. For her first choice, she'll be joined by Steve Gardam as we look at the song labelled Roud 379. That's the song called Green Broom. Sign up to hear this and more at patreon.com/intheroud. In the Roud is a media partner of Veteran, the traditional music label. Although this week's song doesn't currently feature on any of their releases, you can find details of their extensive catalogue on their website, veteran.co.uk. One last huge thanks to this week's guest, Helen Lindley. And join me next week for episode 5. We will be looking at Roud 25, that's child number 9, the Fair Flower of Northumberland. My historical guest will be Sandra Kerr, and my singer guest will be Alistair Roberts. Until then, that's it from me. Stay safe, be well, and I'll see you next time in the Roud.